Welcome to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm the Reverend Foerster, minister of this congregation, privileged to be streaming this service online for your participation. As we journey through these perilous times together, it is important that we stay connected, even at a distance. As I speak in a near-empty church, I cherish the memory of your precious faces and believe I am speaking directly to you. In this way, for this hour, you are connected as well to one another. My topic this morning will be wisdom. It is one of those concepts we all recognize when we see it, but find it difficult to define completely. My definitions, and there are more than one, might be different from yours, but this will be an exploration rather than a certitude. Let us receive one another's points of view as a sacred covenant between us. Let us begin our exploration with the mystical journey of music. My reading this morning is by Jason Cook, who wrote, "We seekers are on a quest to discover truth and meaning. Sometimes we think we've found it, wrapped up, glimmering with newness, straight off the intellectual assembly line. All the answers right here for us, and others, if they'd only listen. But truth has a way of coming in disguise, sometimes wearing rags and sometimes finery, but so often cloaked from our immediate sight. And sometimes that which we have rejected, that which we have let go of or decided was only for others, but not us, can be our teacher. Let our time of worship be an acknowledgement of the never-ending journey toward truth and meaning, and our appreciation of those we learn from along the way." Our first hymn will begin to explore how we might be wise. Let us start by seeking the wisdom of a child. Verse 338. Again this morning, I am lighting our mini chalice here at the pulpit. And on your screen, you will see a reading between us, leader and congregation. We light this chalice to help us move from untruth to truth, to help us move from ignorance to wisdom, to help us move from animosity to love, to help us move from bondage to freedom. We rededicate ourselves before this light to affirm and practice truth wisdom, love, and freedom, today and in the days to come. Let us repeat our covenant together. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Sing loudly till the stars have heard, and joy feast on this bounteous word. Our praises call us to explore, till sun shall rise and set no more. Last week I left off the story for all ages, but it occurs to me that children may be watching as well. So I will share a story, and you know that the adults listen just as assiduously as the children do. This story comes from Ashanti out of Ghana in South Africa. Anansi, the spider, loves to spin a tale. He can regale you for hours with stories full of wonder, stories full of fun, and stories full of facts, too. Because he is so nosy, Anansi knows almost everything about everybody. Almost. But Anansi wants to know everything. So one day he goes to the house of the sun god. "Oh, mighty sun god, you see everything and everyone. Won't you share your great wisdom with me? I'll use it wisely to spin tales of wonder and fun for everyone." And the sun god says, "Anansi, I will put all the wisdom in the world here in this clay pot, but you must share this wisdom with everyone." And Anansi promises to do so. So Anansi takes the pot the sun god has filled with wisdom home with him, and he looks deep inside this big clay pot, and sure enough, he sees sights he has never seen before. He hears sounds he did not know existed. "This is too good to give away," he said. "I will keep this great wisdom for myself. I must hide it," he says, and he looks around for a good hiding place. Anansi decides to climb to the top of the tallest tree. There he will tie up the clay pot, and the leafy branches will hide it. He starts climbing the tree, holding the pot in front of him with one arm. The climbing is so hard. Have you ever tried to climb a tree holding a pot? Anansi wishes he had 9 legs instead of only 8. His youngest daughter is outside and sees what a hard time he's having. "Father," she calls, "it would be easier if you tied the pot onto your back. Then all of your limbs would be free for climbing." Do you think Anansi is happy to get good advice from his daughter? Think again. She is right. That would be easier. Now, why is it some young pup thinks of this when I, who possess all the wisdom of the world, did not? Anansi gets so angry at this thought that he throws the pot to the ground. All the wisdom in the world comes flowing out of the pot. Some falls here, some falls there. No one gets all of the wisdom, but everyone gets some of the wisdom. This is why, even today, wisdom is everywhere. If you listen carefully to the stories spun from storytellers all around the world, you will hear it. It's a good story to keep in mind during this week. This is the time in our service when we share with one another some of the stories that live in this community. And I'm including here in this segment a kind of public service announcement that I have titled "Things to Do While Sheltering in Place That Are Surprisingly Enjoyable." This one comes from my own experience this past week. You no longer can claim you don't have time to do the things you say you want to do but don't do. so do them. This is one that is long overdue. Clean and rearrange your kitchen junk drawer. Everybody has a junk drawer. It may not be in your kitchen, but you know what I mean. So I did this week. And you know, it was an archaeological adventure. Layers of history were revealed as I dug through the deposits of items that have no other place to go. Did you know you can date the layers in your junk drawer, not by carbon dating, but through cough drop dating? The ones that are welded irretrievably to their papers are the oldest, as are all the other items at that layer. The newest are unwrappable. Everything else is relative. I had a lovely online conversation with Julia Sexton this week, who realized that when you have time to look at people you thought you knew, people who provide you with an occasional service or two, you recognize a whole new humanity within them. They are people just like us, doing the best they can, and this recognition is enough to bring tears to your eyes, she says. I was talking with a neighbor of mine who is a Catholic church administrator who was laid off from her job this week, and she was wondering what to do with herself because she had been working since she was 14 and never had stayed home during the day. But she had a different approach to what's going on that I thought I might share with you because it's not part of our tradition, but I think you might understand it as well. She said, I look at this time, this critical, crazy time, as the Good Friday of the crisis. And I know that Easter will come. It just might not be in April. I kind of got one of those tingly feelings in the back of my head when she told me that, and I know she's right. We have to find ways of looking at what's happening with all of us. And now some stories from within our congregation. Joy Fletcher asks that we remember her mother next Tuesday as she undergoes surgery for breast cancer. I hope Joy will let us know next week how the surgery went as we keep her mother in mind. And David Winkowski tells us that just yesterday he learned that Mary Lou Martinez-Stevens died after a long battle with cancer. She was a dear friend who helped him through some very difficult times, and she will be missed. We will keep David in our minds as he grieves this loss. He would also like us to keep a good thought for Melissa Farmer. She's the daughter of a friend of mine that is currently working as an ER nurse in New York. Her father is very proud of her, and we all have heard the stories of how difficult this kind of service has been during this crisis. Let us take a moment to share a silent meditation as we consider these people who come in and out of our lives, who are part of our community, and how important they are to one another. And after a moment of silence, Misha will play a very familiar hymn that we all know, but that we are going to use as a meditation piece for the rest of this time of streaming services. Misha. May the roots of our community keep us together until we are set free to meet one another face to face. I have two brief readings this morning. I think you will find both of them quite interesting in different ways. From Mortimer Adler, who wrote, "Perhaps we know more about the world than we used to, and insofar as knowledge is prerequisite to understanding, that is all to the good. But knowledge is not as much a prerequisite to understanding as is commonly supposed. We do not have to know everything about something in order to understand it. Too many facts are often as much of an obstacle to understanding as too few. There is a sense in which we moderns are inundated with facts to the detriment of understanding. One of the reasons for this situation is that the very media we rely on are so designed as to make thinking seem unnecessary, though this is only an appearance. The packaging of intellectual positions and views is one of the most active enterprises of some of the best minds of the day. The packaging is often done so effectively that viewers, listeners, and readers do not make up their own minds at all. Instead, they insert a packaged opinion into their minds, something like inserting a cassette into a cassette player. Then they push a button and play back the opinion whenever it seems appropriate to do so. They have performed acceptably without having had to think. That gives us something to think about, doesn't it? My second reading is titled Not Just the What, but Also the How by Karen G. Johnston. She wrote, "Wise ones say we can be good, good enough, and imperfect, all at the same time. Wise ones say that we can listen to understand, not necessarily agree, and be moved by a truth that does not make sense to our lived experience, and let it change the world. They tell us also to raise up those who are trodden upon, to cultivate humility when the world would rather we grow certitude in our hearts. Wise ones remind us we can recognize that those who do harm do not always intend to, and that it is still ours to reckon with the impact. They tell us that we can say, 'I don't know,' and 'I'm not sure,' and still be a warrior, still be whole, still be a leader. In fact, the kind of leader we long for. Wise ones tell us to pay attention to not just the what, but also the how. May this be the meditation of our hearts. May this be the words of our mouths. Not just the what, but also the how. May we be the wise ones today and every day." There's a hymn in our hymn book, number 391, titled "Voice Still and Small." And that is one of the wisdoms that we all have, that little voice within us. Let us sing it together now. Voice still and small, deep with light all, I hear your call singing. In dark and rain, sorrow and pain, still we remain singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years singing. So, what can I tell you about wisdom? Partly, wisdom in my mind is culled from my own experience, but mostly from what I have heard others say about it. So, if you plan to listen this morning, promise me you will think about it later and come up with your own conclusion. Then share with me, or with anyone else for that matter, because I'm beginning to suspect that is how wisdom grows. There's a lovely story in the Zen Buddhist tradition about a learned professor who believed that he knew all the knowledge in the world, just like Anansi the spider. He knew all that he needed to know. But he had heard from others that he knew envied his knowledge, that there was a certain monk in a nearby village who was wiser than all other beings for miles around. "Does he know as much as I?" the professor shouted. "Then how can he be more wise?" But he decided to find out for himself. Well, the monk had heard of the professor as well, and when the day of their meeting arrived, the monk was ready. As soon as they had met, the professor demanded, "Tell me how you can be considered the wisest man for miles around." "But first," insisted the monk gently, "let us have some tea. Then we can talk." And they sat at a table set with an embroidered cloth, a lovely warm teapot, and 2 hand-fashioned cups between them. On a small plate were delicate sugared cookies warm from the oven. The monk proceeded to pour some tea into the professor's cup, and when the cup was full, he continued to pour. Soon the tea ran onto the tablecloth and then onto the professor's lap. "Stop!" shouted the professor. "My cup is full. It won't hold anything anymore." "That is true," the monk acknowledged, sitting back and putting down the teapot. "And the same is so of your mind." There are a number of lessons in this little story. First, wisdom is not the same as knowledge. The professor might have been able to win a great deal of money if he would appear on Jeopardy, but it wouldn't mean he would spend his winnings wisely nor make great decisions about how to live his life. Another lesson from this tale might be that experience is a better teacher of wisdom than our words. This is especially true of experience that includes errors of judgment or foolish assumptions. We tend to learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. And third, this story always says we have to let go of some things we believe before we can add new knowledge or new wisdom. I think this is one of the reasons that so many people fear change. Change often means admitting we might have been wrong about something, or we might have to admit that there is more to what we believed than we had first assumed. Think about something you might be familiar with. Think about the child who is raised in a loving family, who comes to believe that he or she is the center of the universe. People will wait on him, feed him, play with him, comfort him when he is sad, assure him when he is frightened, listen to him when he speaks, laugh with him when he is clever. And then she is pushed out into the world, sent to school, expected to play with others, share toys, share admiration, share attention. At first he is astounded at this outcome and then angry. He will not return to this place. She'll stay where she is the center of all things, she says. But that is denied to both him or her. He has 2 choices. She can either resist all contact with others, living only in her head until she returns home each afternoon. Or he can learn to live with this change in circumstances and share existence with his peers, gaining companionship and respect, a greater prize than mere adoration. You remember that lesson, don't you, when you first went out into the world? It didn't come easily to many of us. Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa wrote, "We must surrender our hopes and expectations as well as our fears and march directly into disappointment, work with disappointment, go into it and make it our way of life," which is a very hard thing to do. But disappointment is a good sign of basic intelligence. It cannot be compared to anything else. It is so sharp, so precise, obvious, and direct. If we can open, then we suddenly begin to see that our expectations are irrelevant compared with the reality of the situations we are facing. That is one example of wisdom. Wisdom isn't usually gained, however, with a single lesson. Listen to this story titled Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters by Portia Nelson. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes me forever to find the way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes me a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street and there is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's become a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. And I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. Maybe from that story we can conclude that wisdom comes from humility, which encourages change. I know this. I do it anyway. I know I'm wrong. I correct my mistake, but better yet, I avoid my mistake because I am merely human. There's a piece of wisdom. You can be human, frail, filled with foibles, weak of will, and still be wise. And you can act wisely in one area and still be foolish in another. There's another theory of wisdom that says we already have wisdom. It is part of us, lives within us, and all we have to do is pay attention to it. Call it intuition. Call it a talent or a gift. Call it self-confidence or call it trust. Could we recall what we have known but have forgotten, asks poet Judy Brown, the gifts within ourselves and each other too, and thus transform the world? There are 2 suggestions going on here, one of intuition and one of compassion. Let's look at them both more closely. Are they the same, or are they simply inevitable companions? Now, intuition has often been scoffed at as unreliable, unprovable, a lucky guess, or worse, a feminine way of thinking. In her book, Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes, author Maria Konnikova wrote, "Our intuition is shaped by context, and that context is deeply informed by the world we live in. It can thus serve as a blinder or a blind spot of sorts. But with mindfulness, we can strive to find a balance between fact-checking our intuitions and remaining open-minded. Intuition, that voice still and small that lives within all of us, male and female, is reliable only if we stop doubting it, fact-checking it, and listen to it with an open mind. It leads us, suggests the author, to something more reliable. It is perhaps a signpost to our destination, if it is not the destination itself. But Brown also suggests that if we trust our intuition, it can help us transform the world. Does this belief in ourselves, in internal living wisdom, lead us to compassion? To the knowledge that we are simply part of a larger existence, that like that schoolboy or girl from an earlier lesson, we share the world, that we are more alike than we are different? That is a wisdom that cannot be ignored. It is a wisdom that has proven itself more powerful than dictators, more comforting than tributes, and more reliable than libraries. It is perhaps the ultimate wisdom, and it takes almost a lifetime for most of us to learn it. Well, let me catalog what we have considered here so far. Wisdom comes from letting go of what we think we know. Wisdom is not the same as knowledge. Wisdom is gained from experience, often overcoming negative experiences. Wisdom isn't learned all at once or rapidly or forever. It has to be kept before us. Wisdom requires humility, or at least doesn't retreat when we act foolishly and forgive ourselves of our own frailties. Wisdom comes out of our inner knowing, our intuition. And finally, wisdom is nourished by compassion and understanding. All of these are true, and still, there is so much more to the subject. It would be impossible to cover the entire subject in a mere 20 minutes, not even in 20 years. You see, wisdom is not transferable, but it does lend itself to suggestion and exploration. So I would like to explore just one more aspect of it, one that fascinates me, has fascinated me for a long, long time. It goes under various names, one of them spiritual experience or religious experience. Like intuition, it cannot be proven, is very personal, and can't often be explained. Now, I know I've mentioned it before. I know I've told you of the cloth I embroidered in seminary and framed to hang where I can see it every day. It is a quote from my favorite theologian, Heinrich Zimmer, who said, "The best things can't be told. The second best will be misunderstood." According to Zimmer, these best things are experiences that defy explanation, yet compel us to try to explain. They are often the basis for inspirational teachings, therefore their connection to spirituality or mysticism or religion. They often come as a knowing, as something you understand and simply cannot question. You may have understood it before as knowledge or maybe even accepted fact, but after receiving a knowing, you can never doubt it as indisputable, but you cannot prove it. I told you moments ago that we are more alike than we are different. I've accepted that as a piece of wisdom passed on from someone who knew more than I. But one day, this was my spiritual experience, one day I looked at a person I did not know, and his face disappeared for a moment. Oh, I didn't see flesh or bones where his face had been. I saw only that it was his face that kept me from knowing him completely, from knowing anyone completely. Because we stop at the face. I draw suspicious conclusions by looking at faces, at smiles, at attitudes, I realized. And then, in a moment, his face returned, but my knowing was there. I have to remind myself when I'm practicing the wisdom I have accumulated that behind the faces I see are people like myself and unlike myself, but people filled with their own experiences, their own understandings, their own fears and confidences, their own wisdom and misunderstandings, and I am no better, no worse than they, no smarter, no wiser, and surely no more important. I know this because it was shown to me one day in an experience I cannot adequately describe. I can only wish that this experience comes to you one day and that you trust that I have a knowing I cannot help you believe. So, what do we do of this accumulated secondhand knowledge that I have shared with you today? What have I been trying to offer you? That we are all wise, but could perhaps be wiser? I like to think that. That we should explore other ideas than our own? That's the accepted lexicon of wisdom. Or how about this? That we should honor ourselves, that we should take more time out to refresh ourselves so that we can act on our own wisdom and our compassion, so that we may continue to grow in spirit, in body, and in mind. That there is much yet to learn for each of us, and that is the gift we are given when we are given the gift of life. So take a moment today to rest from the concerns of a threat we cannot see, but is nevertheless real. Take a moment today from all the fret and fever of what is going on around us. I told you last week I would probably use hymn number 1, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door, but I decided this week to add another hymn. The words to that hymn are still very wise, and I pray that nothing evil does cross your door. But now I want to turn to hymn number 90 in our hymn book to have you sing with me from all the fret and fever of the day. Just verse 1. Nisha. This chalice has burned as a symbol of our community until we can once again gather together. We are still one community, being in touch however we may. So I let this light go out because we have it in our hearts and our minds. Now, may all our wisdom show itself in compassion and understanding, and may the fruits of the Spirit be apparent in all our lives. So may it be with you. Postlude.